Hey guys, it's Matt. I'm going to start a new series, I think, called Engineered Society. And the possible topics for engineered society is endless, limitless. Because when you really start noticing things, the whole society's engineered. It's crafted in an unnatural way that couldn't be pulled off by regular people. Even these minion jerks, they're just tools or cogs. It's so unnatural. I'm going to do the summary here, or some of the key points first, for anybody that doesn't want to stick with this video. But I was thinking about fantasy football the other day. Oh, of course, all my friends that I played football with at high school and baseball, and that the jock type group of friends that I had in my 20s and early 30s, everyone, major fantasy football. I was involved just because I was like pulled into it. I was never really interested in it. They would do the draft, have a huge party. You'd come over and do the draft, whiteboards, trades. It was basically ridiculous when you look back at it. But in terms of, first of all, this is like how Facebook came to dominance. To me, it's all crafted, it's all engineered. But when you look at the story here, it doesn't add up. I'm going to just get to the main points, but then we'll go into the details later. There's this history, this exact history of what happened in 1962 on a cross-country trip. And you think, when you have a certain set of eyes, you think, well, how would they know? How would they know all these details? Wikipedia is engineered in an unnatural way. I'd be more apt to believe it came from like E.T.'s spaceship hovering above Australia or something. From literally, E.T. puts out Wikipedia, and then it's just contributors. It just doesn't add up. Some sort of AI whopper or something. All these details. I mean, look at this. Then it's spread across. In 1980, a group of 6 students at Case Western Reserve. See, anybody researching this would be like, they'd find a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy that knows somebody's cousin's uncle's brother's sister's uncle's cousin that would be like, yeah, I think there were some guys at Case Western Reserve that really were doing it. They wouldn't know exactly what happened. I mean, okay, some of these details might be available, but you think, who put these things together with all this detail? And think of it in a common sense way. Nobody thinks about this stuff. We do, because we question reality. But people around us would never look at this the way we're looking at this now. Look at the references for what fantasy football is, and it's simple, guys. I mean, all these all the references would mean whoever put this together read every one of these articles, read every book. Fantasy Football 101, National Football League, The History of Fantasy Football by Eddie Brown, July 28th, 2014. So the person that did this entry, see, this almost proves it's like some kind of bot. The person that just read every single thing about fantasy football. Because how do you cite your bibliography or your references unless you've been combed over and not only just read them, notated exactly what you wanted to use? See, even just documenting this would take it years. Look at this. 35, 36, for those listening, 38, 39, 40 entries, 42 entries. Industry demographic book on fantasy sports and gaming. I mean, who even put all this together? It's still going. 57th reference, 58th, 60th, down to 75. Reference 75 by Martha White, slacking off work by playing fantasy football. Me, it's not as bad as you think. NBC News, retrieved November 17th, 2020. So somebody went through all this. See, it has to be a bot. Even if these somebody might be saying to me, Matt, the North America is a big place. Over time, a lot of people wrote an article or wrote a book about fantasy football. And okay, I'll give you that. But this proves the Wikipedia is unnatural, how it's compiled. Nobody could have gone through all of this. Impossible. So, people might be rolling their eyes. Well, Matt, so what if that's the way it was? Well, how many people realize this? This is supposed to be the number one source of delivering what reality is. You look up in Wikipedia, what happened to building 7, Wikipedia will tell you, well, if Wikipedia is going to be the number one source on what my reality is, then if people find that it's put together by a computer, So let's just look at the history, but it's beyond that. It's a script, guys. It's a script. I don't buy that that would have this many details. Let's just go back to the history of it, and there it is. I mean, who's going to have these details, and how are they researched? Let me read the first paragraph or two, and then I'll stop and complain some more. Modern fantasy football can be traced back to Wilford Bill Wickenbach, an Oakland, California businessman and a limited partner in the Oakland Raiders. Even that, there's too much detail. It's not natural to me. In a New York City hotel room during a 1962 Raiders cross-country trip, Wickenbach, along with Raiders public relations employee Bill Tunnell and Oakland Tribune reporter Scotty Sterling, developed the rules that would eventually be, there's too much detail here. I don't buy it. How would they know it's a cross-country trip? How would they know the nature of the trip? See, if anything was real about this, remember that scene in, it's Kevin Costner's in a movie. He's like, here he goes to bring up Kevin. He's not going to talk about Dances with Wolves again. No, I'm not. I'm going to talk about Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. 100% they will come. People tell me because just based on something trivial, like that's the way the reality reflects today. Don't give me that trivial stuff just because it's in every single movie, in every single VCR tape. I don't buy it. It's they will come. And Kevin Costner himself explaining that. Remember, he went off with James Earl Jones, who was played Terrence Mann, and they were trying to investigate who Doc Brown was, and they got to his hometown, and he had died 10 years or 15 years before. Kevin Costner had some mystical dream experience where he went back in time, walked under the Godfather sign. And then they were just trying to find out about him. So they were hanging out in bars, and some of the guys, they were in their 80s. And they're like, yeah, I remember Doc Brown and these guys. They were just getting little samples from these guys in their 80s about, he used to collect hats for his wife, Ophelia, blah, blah, or Alicia. Alicia's going to think I got a girl. They got little tidbits of information, very vague. So that's the way this would be. If anybody was looking into this naturally, that's the way this would be. Somebody would spend weeks going across the country in an old VW bus with James Earl Jones, and they would be like, find one guy in a bar and be like, yeah, I think after they go to the Lagunitas brew tour in California, be like, yeah, there's a guy locally here, like back in the 60s, I heard. It was that Bill Wickenbach. Like there's some story about him and other guys that worked with the Raiders that they were doing a fantasy football, and they kind of came up with it like in New York City or something. That's all they would get is vague. They wouldn't know. I mean, in New York City, in a New York City hotel room during a 1962 Raiders cross-country trip, why not? Why doesn't there another sentence here telling me what they ordered in room service? Bill ordered the filet mignon rare. I guess it's rare anyway, but you know what I mean. I mean, they didn't. Why don't they tell me every detail of what happened at that hotel room amongst three men? Not that there's anything wrong with that. So it's just bullcrap. The inaugural league was called the GOPPPPPPL, Greater Oakland Professional Pigskin Procrastinators League. Okay, somebody may be like, Matt, I remember that existed. Okay, but there's too much detail. The first draft took place in Winklebach's home. Okay, fine. Okay, even if this Winklebach wrote a book, okay, I can understand this, but then you get into it just follows the history with too much detail. 1969, Andy Musalimis. Let's call him Andy, an original creator of GOPPPL and a participant in the inaugural draft, brought the game to his Oakland sports bar, the King's X. Okay, this could be true. Be like, yeah, I remember my grandfather used to play in the King's X. Fine. But all this detail is going to be available? It slowly spread across the country in the following decades. In 1980, a group of 6 students at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, founded the Indoor Football League. Blah, blah, blah. Charter members Tom Spear, Jeff Cornreach came up with the idea of forming a league after reading a short article in a September 1980 issue. So they're going to remember the exact article. See, even if you could interview Tom Spear, he's still alive, trying to track him down like Doc Brown. It's Doc Graham. Doc Brown's from Back to the Future. Doc Graham. Alicia's going to think I got a girl. He wouldn't be like, yeah, let me tell you, it was this 1980 issue. He'd be like, even the guy himself that did it would be like, well, yeah, I remember there was this Inside Sports magazine that presented something, and we just ran with it. Wouldn't know the September 1980 issue. The guy himself that read it originally wouldn't remember that. See how unnatural this is? It has all of IFL's original members, Tom Spear, Jeff Cornridge, Doug Lowe, Jack Meoff, Mo Bedar, Bill Kovac, Jim Papineau, Dave Peter. Oh, sure. They know every single person. Liz Greenberg. Come on, man. Give me a break. In 1983, the first East Coast rotisserie sports fantasy league was formed at the Marxist School, Georgia. No, it's Marist School, Georgia, in Atlanta. Thanks for telling me in Atlanta. I'd never know. Well, it could be the old Eastern Bloc country, Georgia. I take that back. By 7 high school students. They know this. Scott Frank, Jack Meoff, Frank Doherty, Mark Wesley, Glenn Gilbierty. You can even click on him. There's more information about old Glenn here. Chris Deckard, Jay Gowland. Come on, look at these names. They're like bot names. They don't seem natural. I don't know. I just don't buy it. I don't buy they would have this level of detail. And we'll get off this topic. I mean, we're going to stay on fantasy football. Obviously, I think I've demonstrated somehow how this is put together is unnatural. How much is complete fantasy and fiction? I will never know. A lot of it would be, in my opinion. And because ultimately, this is something that is an incredible use to the system itself. Incredible use. I mean, what they've gotten millions upon millions of people to do through fantasy football. I mean, you want to talk about something that just has completely achieved the aims of what the Not Nilk wants. I mean, let me just tell you about my experience. Again, did this for years. I felt, first of all, of course you have to, you're struggling as some 23-year-old kid. Nobody has any money. You just started, even if you're working for a corporation, you started working for Cigna Corporation at $23,000 a year or $23,500. So you don't have any money. You're still living at home. They want you to put up like $100, or at least, I think it was, the overall was like $150, and then we, had no money, were cheap. But 3 guys got together, so we each put up 50. At least that's what I remember one year with the guys I played with. I think it was 50 each. I don't know exactly, but everybody puts up money. Nobody has any money. And then these guys take it so seriously. You've got this draft, and I watched the NFL as a young man. I don't watch it now. Excuse me. I watched it. I knew who Brett Favre was and some of the big players. These guys would come to the draft. They knew everything. They knew every receiver and who made what Pro Bowl. And then you'd start the draft, and there'd be a big whiteboard. Of course, everybody's drinking, eating was a big thing, and you'd make your picks. And should we pick a quarterback first or a running back first? And I think it was back in the day when I played this in the mid '90s. The running back was all important. I don't know if that's still the case today. And again, I didn't like it when I played it, because one of the problems with the game is it's like, okay, I have to pick the best running back in the league, so I'll just use today's stuff. So you pick Saquon Barkley, but you don't like the Giants. You don't want to root for the Giants. Somebody might be a big Eagles fan. So if the Eagles are playing the Giants and Saquon Barkley he's on the 2-yard line, or it's second and goal, do you want him to score? Aren't you? It's like, I want to root for the Eagles. Again, I don't watch the NFL anymore, guys. It just disgusts me, and I never will. But I did watch the Eagles. I was a fan through my 20s and 30s and 40s. By the time the Eagles made the Super Bowl or won the Super Bowl, whatever, I didn't care. I didn't care. I still watched some NFL, but I didn't care. But it's conflicting. So do you root for your guy, or do you root for I never liked that aspect of it. But these people, then they'll do trades. They'll follow every one of their players. That's what they get, this NFL package, so they can see how all their players doing, go back and forth among 7-8 games at a time to follow their players. I mean, it did suck in. I mean, it sucked 10 million men that already would have watched the NFL, but 10. Okay, there's some women that do this too. It's obviously it's 95% men type thing. I mean, women, I'm sure, are involved in this. But when I went to I just went to my draft party. It was 35 guys. All right, so it gets them so involved in the NFL where they're following their player, but their players, it's brilliant the way they do it. Their players are spread out across 8 teams, so they're following 8 teams closely And they're following what their competitors are doing. So they're probably following another 5 teams where they normally would probably just watch their hometown team, like the Eagles. Or so this to me just sniffs. I don't care what the history says. It's like Facebook. It was brought into prominence, even if the original stories about the history are correct. Of course, the little details, I don't buy it. But generally, it did stem from Bill Wickenbach, and then generally these guys at Case Western Reserve University did something, and the history, you can trace it back. Okay, whatever. Even if that's the case, to me it's like Facebook. Even if Zuck the Borg did something with it, little programming and coding, see, then it got the system popped its head up out of the water, or out of the bog, out of Yoda's bog, and it got noticed. And see, even if it wasn't crafted from the beginning, it got noticed. It's like the way, it was like a maybe truth drop that it's Sean in the movie The Social Network. Sean Fanning. Was it Sean Parker and Sean Fanning? That still confuses me, both associated with Napster. Sean Parker, he's just, ex-Napster, of course, and he's just sleeping around hooking up with girls in the Social Network, and it gets his attention. He's like, "What's this?" It's called like the Facebook, or it's called the Face Mash, or whatever it was when Zuck the Borg first started it, and it gets his attention. Ooh, what's this? It's like the system, representing like the system itself in that movie through Sean Parker. So this might have got the system's attention. Ooh, what's this? And look how locally or regionally we can take this nationally and suck in 15 to 20 million schleps to not only follow their home team, but to follow 15 other teams around the leagues closely and make it a metric of how much of a man you are. Trust me, with these guys in this draft, it was a manly thing. Again, if there are women that do it, sorry, this is not my experience. I didn't go to the Little Women party that hosted it's all been about guys for me. Sorry, it's all been a man thing. I don't mean to, sound a certain way here. And people are like, after that comment, man, you're digging your grave. Okay, fine. Let's just go on. It's I'm just saying, from a guy's perspective, how much about fantasy football is like, you can't go fighting, or we don't arm wrestle anymore. So that's how you prove you're a man, at least in the circles what I ran with, or what I did with fantasy football through the 90s, being pulled into this by friends. I'm sure it's exactly the same experience all these other guys go through, that it's like, oh, I know what, receiver did this, and I know what running back did this, and I know what trades I want to make, and it's all because there's how about the society. You can't prove manliness, or people are like, well, why should you have to prove manliness? Well, it is like a natural thing for 20-some-year-old guys. Okay, it's just these are instincts that are in us, and they're relatively natural. So the traditional ways of doing it, the society crushes. So you have to do it in perverted ways, or bastardized or adulterated ways, like you're going to show how much of a man you are by knowing every statistic about every single running back and wide receiver in the NFL. And honestly, hey, this is fun for a lot of people, of course, and even people listening to this, I'm sure, probably still do a little bit of this. And you treat it as fun, it can be fun. But the people that spend, they've got their little sports books and they're just combing over statistics, and that's going to prove their manlyhood, that's pretty pathetic. So, guys, in summary, the most important thing is really about Wikipedia. Who writes this? Who could possibly who possibly read through all these references? Nobody did. It's impossible. Is a bot putting this together? I mean, look at the references, endless. It would take years just to comb through the references. You never find, well, who wrote? Do you ever get a name as to who's the contributor? So what if Matt tried to be a contributor for Wikipedia? Would they just be like, oh, here you go, Matt, just fill out these applications, and you're going to write about, you can contribute as to what you're an expert at. Yeah, they'd love me. But it's like, who does this? We just don't we get the notion that it's just contributors putting together these Wikipedia? Who are they? Have you ever met one of them? So guys, most of this, you and I would be like, yeah, Matt, it's kind of common sense. But how many people, even in our community, have ever really thought about how close on that sliding scale Wikipedia is to the Matrix or to bot or to, the same thing that generated all those when it was about a year ago. I looked at those C articles when it was hitting in Italy and found, if I searched it a certain way, there were like 30 articles in a row from different sources on the web, different websites that were writing the same sentences, all with like one word was a little bit different. It was just all bot generated. Where other than if you go to, these everybody has a local newspaper typically. If you're in Allentown or Reading, Pennsylvania, Billy Joel, we're living here in Allentown. Not a pretty big sized town or city. There's a local paper. There are people there. But these websites that produce the news, if it's not like something you've heard of, like the Washington Post or something big, it literally could be like, there's not even an address. There's just there is an address. You go to the address and behind a locked door is just a few computers. It's just operating through the Whopper computer as like a regional bot or regional server. There's no actually writers. You think it's it's a news outlet, soandso.com news, and you look through the glass door and it's just servers in there. Not even a robot, just servers, computers, no real human beings at all. And Wikipedia's, I was going to say, is developing into that, but it's probably been that for a long time. And I'm sure there's, if you go to Wikipedia headquarters, a lot of people there, but they couldn't. Who's producing these hundreds of millions of entries? No way, man. And I don't buy the details on how they laid this out either. Don't buy it at all for the reasons I laid out. Thanks for listening, guys.